Robert Hammond looked out at the people trudging down the street with his tired, brown eyes. It seemed like they were wading through knee-high water while the too-hot sun hovered just above their heads. He knew if he stepped out of the coffee shop, the heat and humidity would surround him like a curse. The police car's air conditioning had long ago given up the ghost, but somehow Robert still managed to drive with the windows up without bursting into flame. He figured that all of this heat he had endured was going to be useful when he died and went to hell. Well, unless it froze over and they just threw him in the cold section. Where was that, he thought? The answer came quickly. The place where the betrayers went when they died. "Sir, do you want a refill?" the waitress asked, breaking Robert's morbid train of thought. He just shook his graying head, and then he took another sip of his coffee. It was lukewarm, but not during the infernal years. Lukewarm now was, many years ago, scalding hot. His walkie-talkie squawked. "Car 1176. May Hammond, we need you at Norbert in Sheffield, apartment 5A. Robert grimaced and then dug around in his pocket for some raggedy dollars to pay for the coffee. For a few moments it seemed like he couldn't find anything, but then he found a $5 bill in another pocket. He placed it on the table and walked up to the door. Robert dreaded the rush of heat that would surround him. One sigh and then he opened the door. Of course, the searing warmth wrapped itself around him like a needy relative. Robert just walked through the hammer blows from the sun to his squad car. The puff of hot air that reached him when he opened the door was no big deal. He just sat and felt the heat through his pants. Hot but not skin-searing. Robert had thought maybe his legs were growing scales, then he dismissed it. Few lizards had the patience to be cops. The electric car started with a tired cough and he was off. It didn't take too long to reach the faded red brownstone at Norbert in Sheffield. Too bad the intercom button for 5A was a melted mess. He had to go back to his car and call dispatch to pass on the message to open up. Hot air rushed out when he opened the building's door. Robert looked up. His heart fell when he saw all the stairs he had to climb. When Robert got to the 5th floor, it felt just a bit cooler. 2 uniformed cops stood next to the door to 5A, as though they were enjoying something. He nodded to them as he approached. Robert wasn't sure, but it seemed like there was cool air coming through the slightly open door. Detective Simmons, who had tired eyes, walked up to the door and pointed to the 2 uniformed cops. "What did I tell you guys? Keep the dang door closed. You're messing up a crime scene." He blinked once and then waved Robert in. Robert knew Simmons from working in the 2-5. He had helped him with some homicide cases. "What are we dealing with?" Simmons just shrugged. "I don't know, but I want to stay here until the room heats up." The room definitely felt cool, like there was some high-end air conditioning going on. Ever since the new power use rules went into effect, very few air conditioners had enough juice to cool the room like this. Robert noticed that except for these squawks from the walkies that the other cops had, there were no air conditioner sounds. He wondered how the person or persons were able to cool this room down. Robert scanned the hallway while following Simmons. To be honest, it wasn't worth writing home about. A bunch of old photos in the hallway showing a short-haired, dumpy woman, with other short-haired, dumpy women. The hallway opened into a cooler kitchen and living room area. Again, no big deal. Simmons turned and smiled a yellow, nicotine-stained smile. "This is nothing. Wait till you get to the bedroom." The temperature continued to drop as they made a left turn into another hallway. Robert almost wanted to smile too. The cool air made him feel good. After years of the heat, he got a break. Finally, they stood outside a white wooden door. Simmons knocked and the door opened. Inside, there were several detectives lounging and smiling. Someone said, "Get them in and shut that dang door." Simmons and Roberts rushed into the waiting arms of the almost cold room. All of the detectives had smiles on their faces. Robert looked at the bed. Instead of a corpse, there is a greenish-blue outline of a woman's body. Waves of cold air radiated from the bed like it came right from the South Pole. The ice pack around the North Pole had melted a long time ago. "You should have been here earlier. It was like being in a meat locker. It's still good now," one of the detectives said. Robert looked around the room. It seemed like the woman was a big fan of books. Almost no one reads the physical stuff now. The internet and ebooks took care of that. A quick glance at the bookcase showed these were not in English. He checked out the other bookcases too. They also didn't have anything written in English. Robert waved at the fading greenish-blue shape. "Do you know who that was?" Simmons nodded. "Yeah, Bridget Holmstrom, 34, worked as an English teacher." The marvelous coolness of the room was fading quick now. Robert knew that it wouldn't be long before the room would be hot again. He took another look at the bed. The shape was gone. Robert sighed. It felt good to be cool. "How should we handle this?" Simmons nodded again. 2-5 got this. Don't worry about the body. We took a lot of pictures before you got here. The room was slowly heating up, but it was still cooler than outside. Robert looked around. "I'll see what I can do." He left the bedroom, followed by Simmons. His decent spirits melted away as they moved out into the hot hallway. The two uniformed cops looked like they were starting to slump in the heat. He gave them a sad look and went downstairs to his car. Back at the precinct, it was hot. Robert was sure he wasn't going to see any demons. They had no patience for these temperatures. He did think he smelled some brimstone, or maybe it was coffee. It took him a moment to lean back in his chair. Of course, the metal was warm. If he was going to find out who had killed Mrs. Holmstrom, he had to find out more about her. Robert sighed as he turned on his computer and checked for new info. It looked like the crime scene. Folks who go through places and look for clues were still going through the apartment. If he held his breath for that report, he would be blue. For a moment he thought about the digital forensics folks. They can't help because they didn't get any equipment from the crime scene. Also, Robert didn't remember seeing a computer or a smartphone. That meant a trip back to her building. Her hot building, he shrugged. Several hours later, it was the usual. Variants on how she was really nice and quiet. Nobody knew anything. After tromping up the hot stairs and talking to clueless folks, Robert was glad to be outside in the heat. The sun was going down in an orange blaze of glory. For some reason, he walked to a local park. It was a sorry sight. Dead trees stuck out of the dirt like twigs left by an idiot giant. The black metal monkey bars looked hot enough to cook anything that would touch them. He just sat down on a peeling green bench. Nowadays, kids stayed indoors where it was somewhat cooler. Even the drug dealers did their business indoors too. Robert was alone in the park until the woman showed up. He just knew something was off about her. She had upswept red hair, bright blue eyes, and hands that never stopped moving. For some strange reason, her skin was pale. The woman fixed her eyes on him. "I can help you." "How?" "The woman that died." "A lot of women and men die. Can you be more specific?" The woman sighed. It was more like a quick twitch. Blink and you would miss it. Robert's wacko alert started to go off. The woman that was in the cool room, she did something unnatural. The balance has been broken. Robert scrutinized her. She didn't look like some sort of religious person. They always had a big golden cross front and center. He sighed. Please tell me what happened. I have work to do. The woman smiled, or actually bared her teeth really quickly. She unleashed something in this city that will destroy the world unless stopped. If we work together, we can stop it. Sweat dripped down his face and back. Looking at the woman was making him hotter. Why would she do that? The woman's hands moved so fast, it seemed like they blurred. She summoned something that feeds on heat, and then she lost control. Robert blinked and then cursed as stinging sweat fell into his eyes. Okay, how about you give me your phone number and we can discuss this while I'm not drowning in my own sweat? The woman spat out. Fine. And then she gave him a business card. He was surprised that the card felt hot and almost dropped it. When Robert looked up, she was gone. A moment later, he shoved it into his pocket where he could feel its warmth against his leg. Dinner was some sort of greasy mess. He didn't really care what it was. When he hit his hot-sheeted bed, sleep claimed him quickly. There he was, walking among green, white, and blue-white mounds of ice. The wind tore into him, thrilling every nerve, and it felt glorious. As he strode past the frozen piles, it struck him that they were buildings. And then his cell phone rang. For a moment, he was still in the cold dream and the heat of the room was ignored. The cool moment passed and sweat ran down his back like a salty stream as he answered the phone. Hello. We got an incident on 23rd on Foreman Ave. Bring a winter coat. You'll need it. Simmons hung up. Dismay was slowly replaced by curiosity. Robert wondered why he needed a coat. He washed up, got dressed, and then pawed through his closet. He remembered it was at least 8 months since he needed to wear something thicker than a light shirt. It took a few minutes before he found his winter coat. Robert took a sniff and regretted it. Musty and dusty his old coat was. After sneezing for a few minutes, he shook the coat until most of the dust was gone, and then he left his apartment with it under his arm. Foreman and 23rd felt cooler than the other blocks that he drove through. People thronged the street like it was some sort of block party, and well, it kind of was. The block was cooler and folks were enjoying a respite from the heat. Robert looked up at the building, at the top floor. Ice was slowly melting, causing a cool drizzle down to the sidewalk. He put on the coat and went through the police line to the apartment building. Again, this building didn't have an elevator, so Robert started to sweat in his open coat until he reached the floor before the roof. And then he had to zip up the coat. It was too cold to leave it open. Sheets of ice covered the ceiling. Some guy wearing a puffy brown winter coat was in the hallway, looking up when Robert reached the landing. My freaking TV is toast, but dang, it feels good. You remember when we used to get snow? Not this hot versus way hotter crap. Robert nodded. He remembered. The icy bite of the wind, the parties, and Christmas. Now Christmas and 90+ temps almost didn't feel right. He started up the stairs to the roof. The going was a bit tougher here. There were small patches of ice on the steps. A uniformed cop nodded at Robert when he reached the landing. Watch your step. Robert nodded. It was icebox cold up here. When he reached the roof, it was full of cops taking pictures as well as some forensic techs. Then there were the frozen partygoers. He doubted that they would be alive if thawed out. Simmons was there, and Robert didn't like what he saw in his eyes. Confusion and fear were never the best things to see in a veteran cop's face. Simmons noticed the look on Robert's face. I don't know what the heck happened here. I thought maybe someone brought up some of that liquid nitro and they lost control. They stopped with most of the frozen gas deliveries after the tank exploded in the heat. The techs don't think it's a frozen gas problem though. I wish they would give me something to work with other than confused and dazed looks. Robert looked around. The party seemed swanky. The frozen corpses were well dressed. Fancy frozen food sat on the tables and never to be eaten. Even the drinks were multicolored ice. He wondered how cold things had to be to freeze them. Dismay filled his heart. The techs were probably not going to find any leads. Simmons tapped him. I know what you're thinking. We may have to call in the feds. Robert grimaced. Yeah, you know how much respect those stuffed shirts have for us. Simmons looked away, then back at Robert. Yeah, but I don't like this situation. More folks are going to become popsicles unless we do something. After the techs give me their final reports, I'll contact the FBI and hope that their budget cuts won't get in the way. Do you need any help? Nah, we're fine. I figured you might like some cold in your life. Nah, more cold. At least we don't live in LA. They would love some cold considering the dust storms and stupid high temps that they get. Yeah, but we have wet heat and sometimes dry heat too. Simmons shrugged. Robert left the roof. While he walked down the stairs, he wondered what was going on. Back at his oven-hot apartment, Robert was too cranked up to sleep. The idea of lying on hot sheets to grab a few scraps of sleep drove him to stay up in pace. Of course, it was mindless. The case didn't make sense. This wasn't Gotham. There was no Mr. Freeze running about, and of course, no Batman either. How are they going to catch the person or persons responsible? He shoved his hands roughly into his pockets, and that's when he felt the business card. It even felt warmer than his apartment. A moment later, he was looking at it. The One Flame. That was the name of the organization. That was Edith Pyre's business card. Robert sighed. He had said some crazy stuff, but then he knew something had to be done. Every lead had to be followed to its final conclusion. He sighed again. Meeting more wackos was not his favorite thing. More sweat dripped down his back while he stood outside the red and orange bricked Callaway building. The One Flame's offices or whatever were inside. He didn't get that much sleep last night, but yeah, whatever. Robert soldiered on and entered the building. Dang, he was expecting to get a puff of less hot air, but this place just breathed in him like a dragon. It was hotter in here than outside. He crossed the shiny red and black marble floor. For some reason, it reminded him of hot coals. Thankfully, no smoke arose from his well-worn shoes. The place was also too quiet. Other than the receptionist who sat at a red-brown desk, the lobby was empty. He stopped a step away from the desk. It was radiating a bit of heat like a glowing coal. A glance showed that the brown-skinned woman wasn't even sweating. Robert briefly wondered why, and then focused on what he had to do. More sweat dripped down his back. "Can I help you?" she purred. Robert reached into his pocket and got the business card. "I would like to see Miss Pyre." She fussed with her computer. Robert watched as red and orange light moved across her beautiful round face. "She'll meet you in guest room 1. Visitors find it to be cooler." She pointed off to Robert's right. He nodded and walked into the room. Inside it had the same color scheme. Red chairs next to a black table with red highlights. The room did feel a bit cooler. Well, if you compare 1,000 degrees versus 100. Robert eyed these seat cushions and wondered if he would feel the heat through his pants. A moment later, his butt verified his suspicions. His car seat was just a bit cooler, so he was used to this. Robert changed his seat so he could see who came into the room. He was rewarded with seeing Mrs. Pyre hesitate in the doorway, like she smelled something foul. It was obvious that she didn't like the cooler guest rooms. He wondered what the temperature was inside of her office, and then a bead of sweat ran down his back. No, he really didn't want to know. Miss Pyre gazed at him. "Do you want some water, coffee, or a snack?" Robert shook his head. The water would be hot, maybe boiling. The only time he wanted to fuss with water is if it had coffee in it. "Thank you, I'm good." She nodded. "Why are you here?" Again, another sweat drop ran down his back. "You know what happened on Foreman?" "Yeah." "Fine, I need to know what's going on. I need to find a way to stop this guy, thing, whatever." Miss Pyre frowned. "It's not a guy. It's a being. You can't kill it with your guns or any guns. It's immortal." Robert frowned. The idea that this thing couldn't be killed bothered him. He wondered if the city was at the mercy of this creature. "What do we do about this thing?" "Well, there's very little you can do. The most that can be done is that the being can be sent away. Once it's gone, things should go back to normal. We know how to deal with this being." "Wait, if you know how to deal with this thing, why haven't you done it already? Lives are at stake." Miss Pyre looked away for a moment. "It's not that easy." "Like hell it isn't. Do what you have to do to stop more people from dying. Or you guys get off this stuff." Robert glared at Miss Pyre. "To preserve the balance, we have to get a guardian or someone like that to request our help. I'm sorry, but that is a rule here. To be honest, those people on Foreman would be alive if you had accepted my offer." She sent some bright blue stink eye his way. An uneasy silence filled the room. Robert sighed. "Fine, what do I have to do?" "Just ask for our help." "Please, Miss Pyre, help me stop this freezing thing from killing more people." Her head blurred like she nodded too fast. "Okay, we'll take it from here. Oh, and I almost forgot. Let this be our little secret." Robert stood up and then nodded. He had no intention of telling anybody. No one would believe him anyway. Miss Pyre left the room so fast, Robert barely saw her go. She just blurred out of there. It was so warm in that place. Outside felt cool in comparison. Robert shrugged and got into his car. There was going to be a pile of paperwork for him. The only highlight of the day was getting an email from Simmons. It seemed that his bosses wanted to delay going to the feds for a week. Robert wondered if the problem would be solved by then, and they wouldn't need the arrogant pricks. That would be good. The rest of the workday moved along. Dinner was some sort of hot mess, but he didn't care. Eating out was probably killing him slowly, but again, he didn't care. A belly full of questionable stuff. He went to sleep on sheets that felt like they came right out of an oven. And when the dream started, he knew they were different from his normal set of heat-filled nightmares. It was like a montage of his childhood. Sliding in the snow, hearing snowflakes hitting the windows, walking in the middle of a silent snow-covered forest, while snow crunched and squealed under his booted feet. He realized that something wasn't right. When he was a kid, they didn't have that much snow, and he lived nowhere next to a forest. These aren't my memories. What the heck is going on? Would you like to have such real-life experiences? A voice said. It was warm like something from a favorite relative. And then the speaker appeared. She looked like the aunt that he never had. rosy red cheeks, hair upswept into a snow-white bun, and a smile. One thing was missing: her eyes. It wasn't that she didn't have any, he just couldn't see them. For some reason her face still felt alright. They were standing in a clearing, while snow-covered trees surrounded them for like miles. Robert frowned. "Let me guess, you're some sort of cold miser." "What? Oh no. I'm different from those squabbling, fictional creatures." "Wait, how do you know me? Of all the people in this city." "I can feel your desire for cold. It's very strong." Robert stepped back. He didn't like the idea that something was reading his mind. "I can help you with your needs." "No, I'm fine. You need to stop killing people." "Well, I get hungry." "Bake a cake or order out. I can't have you turning the city into a buffet." "Well, I would change my dining habits. Would you like to have a white Christmas? No heat without some cooling off. I can provide you respite from the relentless heat." "Really? And how many have to die?" There was a long delay before the answer came. "You mortals die anyway. Many die for some reason every day. Maybe with your help, some of those deaths can be put to good use." Robert frowned. "Would you like not to be under the too hot thumb of your planet's sun? You do realize that the heat will only get worse. With my help, maybe the situation can be reversed." It sounded good. Too good. He had sworn an oath to protect and serve. Allowing this creature to feed on people would be like breaking faith. The creature sighed. "You know, maybe with your help, you can pick out folks that want to die. Considering these sorry short lives mortals live, I'm quite sure that there are plenty of people who want to move on. If you want, I can make the passing pleasurable for them." Robert peered at the auntie creature. It's still murder. These folks need to live out their lives in peace. "Decide soon. I might have to leave," Auntie said. He still couldn't see her eyes. It seemed so cut and dry. Kill the monster, save the people. But the prospect of years, maybe more decades of unrelenting heat, gnawed hungrily at his righteous resolve. The last place that he went to, people were enjoying the relative coolness. Did he have the right to damn them to the crushing heat too? Robert shook his head. He didn't care about those people. The feel of the cold air blowing against his face was so invigorating. Did he want more years of suffering until, in his old age, his heat-addled brain melted and dripped out of his nose? He pulled out his gun. He gently shook his cup of iced coffee and heard the small ice cubes ring against the edge of that cup. That was one of his gifts. Robert didn't want to think about the consequences of what he did. A look of surprise and betrayal on the faces of the 3 women that he had to kill. Well, that would be with him for a while. Especially Edith Pyre. She seemed even more surprised than the other 2. If she didn't try to burn him with an orange-red sheet of flame, he might have lost his nerve, but Auntie Icy protected him. And then Robert shot Edith in the head and watched her 2 bright blue eyes fade. For a moment it was quiet, and then Auntie whispered, "Thank you. I have gifts for you." She kissed him. It felt cool, and then the cold increased until he passed out. The overworked waitress stopped next to Robert and broke him out of his thoughts. "Look at it come down. My mother used to tell me stories about snow in the city, and now I get to see it." Robert hunched over his cup. He didn't want the woman to see the ice. Now he had to think of warm targets for Auntie. Bang, an idea hit him. It made him smile. He was going to go back to the offices of the One Flame and teach them to chill forever. A part of his mind wondered if this is how it feels to be evil. Robert pushed that thought away. He would still do his cob work, but now he would also find those who wanted their pain to be taken away. Only good people would do such things. Outside, the snow came down in blinding white sheets. People trudged and slipped through the snow on the ground. Some of them even had smiles on their faces. The waitress sighed. Amazing. I wanted to have snow on Christmas Day for years, and now it's finally happening. Merry Christmas. Robert finished his iced coffee and said, Merry Christmas.